The forest was different at dawn. There was a hush, heavy and expectant, as mist floated between the thick trunks of the Minnesota pines. The world was bathed in silvery blue, the ground soft with dew, everything quiet, except for the sudden sound of claws scrambling, the thud of a wild heart, and the sharp snap of twigs in the undergrowth. Finn, a broad-shouldered bobcat with a scar nicked through his right ear, was a creature born for this landscape. Stealthy, powerful, wild. Yet in this fleeting moment, none of those strengths mattered. He'd been chasing the scent of a rabbit, weaving between fallen logs and stones slick with moss, when the ground beneath him gave way. There was no warning, just a shock of cold air, a shattering sense of freefall, and then darkness as the earth swallowed him whole. He landed hard, his body twisting mid-air before crashing onto damp stone. The impact jolted the breath from his lungs. Instinctively, he scrambled to his feet, but pain shot up his foreleg. His claws scraped uselessly against the curved stone of the well. The world above was nothing but a thin, gray slice of sky. So far away it might have been another world. A shrill, frantic mew echoed above the rim. Riley, his cub. Just months old, still soft with youth, Riley's golden eyes peered over the jagged lip of the well. Her cries cut through the quiet morning like a blade, the sound desperate, almost human in its panic. She circled and paced, small form trembling, never straying far from the spot where her father had disappeared. Finn's mind raced with terror. He tried to call out, but all that emerged was a strained, guttural rasp. The cold in the well was bone deep. Water trickled along the stones, soaking into his fur, chilling him with every second. He forced himself to move, to test his limbs. His left paw wouldn't bear weight, sprained or worse. Panic rose in his throat, a primal urge to fight or flee, but there was nowhere to go. He pressed his side to the rough wall, drawing shaky breaths, listening to Riley's cries. Above, the morning brightened by degrees. The pine needles glittered with dew, but the world seemed oblivious to Finn's plight. A squirrel darted by, pausing for an instant before flicking its tail and vanishing. Crows called to each other in the distance. Every sound reminded Finn how alone he was, and how utterly helpless. Yet it was Riley's presence that kept him tethered to hope. She didn't leave, even as hours ticked by and the sun began to burn through the mist. She mewed and yowled, running circles around the well, sometimes disappearing into the brush only to return moments later, as if searching for a way down. Once she even tried to jump, her tiny claws scraping against the stone. But she fell back, landing in a heap, shaking but unhurt. Inside the well, Finn's thoughts tumbled as chaotically as his fall. He'd always taught Riley caution. Stay away from humans. Hide at the first scent of danger. Trust only your own. But now, as exhaustion dragged at his eyelids and cold seeped deeper into his bones, he wondered if he'd doomed them both by being too careful, too solitary. Suddenly, a new sound broke the pattern of the morning. A distant bark, the crunch of boots on leaves, faint voices calling back and forth. Riley's ears perked up. She darted to the edge of the clearing, vanishing into the undergrowth. Finn's heart hammered. Was it danger or hope? A few tense minutes passed. Then Riley reappeared, breathless, looking back over her shoulder. The voices drew closer. Finn's every sense was on fire with anxiety and anticipation. Would they see Riley? Would they find him? Or would the forest swallow this little drama whole, just another tragedy lost beneath the ancient pines? The sun finally crested the treetops, sending shafts of gold through the mist. Riley sat at the well's edge, tiny and determined, staring into the dark where her father waited. Finn looked up at his daughter, and for a brief, shivering second, felt something stronger than fear. He felt faith. If there was any hope in this vast and indifferent world, it was in the wild, unbreakable loyalty between them. But as the forest fully awoke, time was running out. The cold was worse now. Finn shivered uncontrollably, his breath fogging in the air. Riley's cries grew weaker, tinged with desperation. The voices faded, replaced by the ordinary silence of the woods. Finn closed his eyes, clinging to consciousness, clinging to the image of Riley's face above the rim. Whatever happened next, he would not give up. Above, the wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of humans, and maybe, just maybe, the first faint thread of hope. As the sun climbed higher, its golden light sliced through the mist, revealing a world that felt colder, not warmer. The pine forest was still, as if holding its breath. Down below, in the clammy dark of the well, Finn's body ached with every small movement. His injured paw throbbed relentlessly, and a chill settled deep into his bones, making it hard to focus, hard even to keep his eyes open. He forced himself to stay awake, pressing his body against the rough stone for warmth. But it was no use. The cold seemed to crawl inside him. Every sound above echoed strangely down in the well, distorted and faint. He tried to gauge time by the changing light above, but the day seemed endless. The slice of sky never looked closer. Above, Riley paced in circles, stopping every few minutes to peer down, mewing softly. The cries were growing hoarse. The little bobcat was trembling, her fur fluffed out against the dawn chill, instinct warred with confusion. Should she stay with her father, or go search for help? She was so small, so new to the dangers of the forest, and for the first time since she was born, she was truly alone. A gust of wind rattled the branches. Riley startled, crouching low in the brush. Her wide golden eyes scanned the forest, searching for threats. The lessons Finn had taught her flooded her mind. Hide at the first sign of humans. Avoid the open. Trust your senses above all else. But nothing in those lessons had prepared her for this moment. Her world had changed in an instant. She no longer had the luxury of simply surviving. She had to act. Finn, drifting in and out of a restless, pained sleep, woke with a start as a pebble bounced down the wall, landing near his paw. He called weakly, but his voice barely carried. Riley's face appeared at the rim, ears flattened in worry. The two bobcats locked eyes, father and daughter, both desperate, both fighting to hang on. Above, Riley finally made her choice. With a trembling breath, she turned away from the well and disappeared into the underbrush. Her tiny paws left faint tracks in the soft earth. She paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back only once before vanishing among the ferns and wild grasses. The forest was not a gentle place, even on a bright morning. Danger was everywhere. The shadow of a circling hawk overhead, the scurrying of foxes, the far-off baying of a coyote. Riley moved cautiously, hugging the ground, her ears flicking with every strange sound. She remembered the paths she and Finn had traveled together, the old log bridge across the stream, the hollow tree where they had once taken shelter in a storm. As she moved, Riley's heart raced, both with fear and with a strange kind of resolve. She didn't know what she was looking for, help, hope, a miracle, but she knew she had to keep moving. Every instinct told her to hide, but another deeper urge pushed her forward. Back in the well, Finn tried not to imagine the worst. Every minute stretched into an eternity. The pain in his paw was growing worse, but the ache in his heart was sharper still. He remembered the first time he'd left Riley alone, just long enough to hunt. He'd been terrified she would wander off, that something would happen. Now she was out there, alone in the vast, dangerous woods, because he was trapped. The hours blurred together. Every so often, Finn caught the sound of movement above. A bird, a squirrel, maybe even Riley returning. But each time he looked up, the rim of the well was empty. Shadows lengthened across the ground, the light growing dimmer as the sun arced across the sky. The cold returned as the warmth faded, creeping through Finn's battered body. Riley's journey through the woods was a gauntlet of obstacles. At one point, she heard the distant sound of a dog barking, a sound that sent fear skittering through her veins. She crouched low, heart hammering, as a pair of hikers passed by on a distant trail, their laughter echoing through the trees. She considered approaching them, but the lessons of caution held her back. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she pressed on. She followed scents, listened for sounds of life, and avoided anything that smelled of danger. She stumbled once, falling down a short embankment, and lay stunned for a moment before getting shakily to her feet. She was learning, fast and hard, that the forest could be unforgiving. When she finally reached the outskirts of the woods, she found herself near a dirt road, the scent of humans stronger here. She crouched in the brush, torn between fear and hope. She watched as a hiker, a woman with a bright red backpack, paused to adjust her boots. Riley let out a tentative, wavering yowl. The woman looked up, startled, searching for the source of the sound. For a long moment, their eyes met, wild and human, uncertain and curious. But before she could muster the courage to step out into the open, a car rumbled by, sending Riley scurrying back into the trees. She circled, restless, searching for a safer way to approach. The moment had passed, but the idea remained. Maybe, just maybe, someone would notice her. Maybe help was possible. Back at the well, the light was fading fast. Finn curled in on himself, shivering, haunted by memories and regrets. He pictured Riley's brave little face, the determination in her eyes. He clung to hope, refusing to give in to the darkness. Somewhere out there, his daughter was fighting for both their lives. All he could do was wait, and believe that she would find a way. As night began to fall, the forest filled with the sounds of nocturnal life. But amid the darkness, there was a fragile thread of hope, woven from the courage of a cub and the unbreakable bond between parent and child. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and, perhaps, a chance for rescue. The next morning broke with a faint blush of pink on the horizon, but for Officer Laura Bennett, it was just another day at the ranger station on the outskirts of town. Her coffee steamed in her hands as she scanned the forest through the frosty window. This stretch of northern Minnesota was both a paradise and a challenge. Wild, beautiful, and unpredictable. Laura loved it for exactly those reasons. She was reviewing reports. Minor trespassing here. Bear tracks spotted there. When the phone rang. "Ranger Station, this is Laura," she answered, her voice steady. On the other end, a hiker spoke quickly, the words tumbling over each other. "Hi, sorry to bother you. I just had the weirdest thing happen. I was walking near the Old East Trail and, I swear I'm not making this up, a young bobcat came right up to me. She looked lost, kept meowing. It was strange. She ran off before I could get a picture." Laura's brow furrowed. Wild bobcats were reclusive. For one to approach a human, especially during the day, was highly unusual. She asked a few quick questions. Where, when, which direction the animal had gone. The hiker sounded rattled but sincere. When she hung up, Laura stared out at the pine woods, her mind whirring. Something was wrong. Maybe the cub was injured, or sick, or maybe something even worse. A poacher, a trap, an accident had left her desperate. She grabbed her gear, radioed her partner, and set out toward the east trail, her boots crunching over frost-tipped grass. The woods felt different that morning, charged with a quiet tension. Laura moved carefully, alert for any sign of wildlife. The underbrush rustled, and a pair of chickadees flitted overhead. She was halfway down the trail when she heard it. A faint, high-pitched yowl. Not a bird, not a fox. Definitely a bobcat cub. Laura crouched, moving slowly, scanning the ferns and fallen logs. A flash of movement caught her eye. A small, tawny shape darting between the trees, eyes bright with fear and determination. It was Riley. The cub froze, ears back, watching Laura with wary curiosity. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as if deciding to trust this strange human, Riley let out another plaintive mew, turning to glance back the way she'd come. She took a few tentative steps toward the brush, pausing to see if Laura would follow. A rush of adrenaline shot through Laura's veins. "Are you trying to show me something?" she murmured, her voice gentle, almost coaxing. She moved forward, careful not to startle the cub. Riley led Laura through a maze of undergrowth, weaving between ferns and roots, always looking back to make sure the human was following. Her movements were urgent but purposeful. Laura radioed her partner, her words quick and hushed. "I've got eyes on a bobcat cub. She's leading me somewhere. I think she needs help." The forest deepened as they moved off the trail, the canopy thick overhead. Shafts of sunlight cut through the branches, painting the ground in dapples of gold and shadow. Laura's breath came in white puffs as she pushed deeper, her boots slipping on mossy rocks and tangled roots. Riley moved faster now, her desperation clear. She darted through a gap in the brush and stopped, meowing frantically at the edge of a clearing. Laura followed, heart pounding. The clearing was small, ringed with old pines and carpeted in fallen needles. At its center was a crumbling, moss-covered stone well, half hidden by ferns and brambles. Laura felt a chill. This was no ordinary landmark. Something was wrong here. Riley crept to the well's edge and peered over, letting out a heart-wrenching cry. Laura hurried over, her instincts on high alert. She looked down, and her breath caught. At the bottom, nearly invisible in the dim light, lay Finn. The big bobcat was curled on his side, fur matted and muddy, his breathing shallow. He lifted his head at the sound of Laura's voice, eyes wide with pain and exhaustion. Blood smeared one paw, and the stones around him were slick with moisture. The well was too deep for him to climb, the walls too slick for claws to grip. Laura's heart twisted. She'd seen plenty of rescues, but the raw emotion on Riley's face, the desperate hope, the unwavering loyalty, hit her hard. For a moment, she stood in silent awe of the little cub's bravery. Laura pulled out her radio, her voice tight but controlled. "This is Bennett. I need immediate backup at the old well off East Trail. Injured adult bobcat, cub present. Possible fall. We'll need animal rescue and climbing gear. Repeat, urgent." She knelt by the well, speaking softly to Finn and Riley. "Hang in there, big guy. We're going to get you out. I promise." The big cat blinked slowly, as if understanding. While she waited for help, Laura watched Riley. The little bobcat never strayed from the well's edge, mewing quietly, occasionally glancing at Laura as if to check she was doing things right. It was more than animal instinct. There was a fierce protectiveness, a loyalty that transcended the wild. Laura wondered at the odds. How many times had hikers passed this old well without noticing? If Riley had been less brave, less persistent, Finn would have been lost forever in the cold dark. Instead, a cub's love had brought help. It was a miracle woven from courage and desperation. In the distance, the sound of engines and voices signaled that help was on the way. The sense of urgency mounted. For Finn, time was running out. For Riley, hope was a flickering flame. And for Laura, this rescue was quickly becoming something more than just another day at work. It was a test of compassion, a moment she would never forget. As the morning sun reached its peak, shadows fell across the clearing, and the race to save Finn and reunite the Bobcat family truly began. The woods grew dense and shadowed as afternoon crept toward evening, the once golden light dissolving into dusky blue beneath the pines. Officer Laura Bennett paced at the edge of the old well, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of her fellow rangers. Every minute seemed to drag, the air thick with tension and the smell of damp earth. Finn lay at the bottom, his battered body curled tight against the stone wall. He barely moved now, exhaustion etched deep into every line of his powerful frame. His wounded paw was raw and swollen, streaks of dried blood staining his fur. The cold pressed in, as relentless as the worry gnawing at his mind. Above, Riley remained his lifeline, her small silhouette a constant presence at the well's edge. The steady rhythm of her worried mews, a fragile thread tying Finn to hope. Laura's partner, Ranger Marcus Lee, finally burst through the brush, breathless and carrying a heavy rescue pack. His face went pale as he saw the scene. "God, he's in bad shape," Marcus murmured, kneeling beside Laura and peering into the darkness below. "That well's at least 15 feet deep. There's no way he's climbing out on his own." "Animal rescue and the fire crew are on their way," Laura replied, her voice tense but resolute. "We just need to keep him calm until they get here." She glanced at Riley, who met her gaze with a flick of her tail and a determined look. "And we need to make sure his cub stays safe, too." They set to work, laying out blankets, ropes, and a first aid kit at the well's edge. Marcus carefully tossed down a soft woolen blanket, hoping to give Finn some insulation from the icy stone floor. Finn's ears twitched at the new scent, but he was too weak to move. He watched them with wild, wary eyes, torn between hope and instinctive distrust. Darkness thickened as the sun dipped behind the trees. The temperature dropped, and a hush fell over the clearing. Every now and then, the wind would stir the branches, sending pine needles spiraling to the forest floor. The only sound was the occasional snap of twigs as the rescue team picked their way through the brush, their flashlights cutting beams of gold through the gathering gloom. The rescuers arrived in force, 2 firefighters in heavy coats, a wildlife rescue tech named Jess with quick hands and kind eyes, and a local volunteer, Old Pete, who'd spent a lifetime tramping these woods. Each moved with purpose, their faces drawn with concern. Jess knelt beside the well, lowering a tiny dish of water and a chunk of raw meat on a rope for Finn. The big bobcat sniffed at it suspiciously, then lapped at the water, too thirsty to resist. The meat he ignored, pain and shock leaving him with little appetite. "We need a plan," Marcus said, glancing from the well to the worried faces around him. That wall's too slick for a simple rope rescue, and Finn's not going to cooperate if he's terrified. Jess nodded. Let's set up a harness and lower one of us down. If we go slow, talk to him softly, maybe we can get him in the sling without anyone getting hurt. She looked at Laura. You're good with animals. You want to go? Laura hesitated for a second, her heart pounding. She'd handled rescues before. Dogs, deer, even a trapped bear once. But nothing quite like this. Still, she nodded, steeling herself. I'll do it. While the team set up ropes and secured harnesses to a sturdy pine, Laura knelt beside Riley. The little cub pressed close, her eyes never leaving the well. It's okay, Laura whispered, offering her fingers for Riley to sniff. We're going to help him. I promise. For a moment, animal and human sat side by side, united by hope and fear. As the last of the daylight faded, Laura slipped into the harness and took a deep breath. The team lowered her slowly, the rope creaking and dust spiraling down into the darkness. The air was damp and cold, thick with the scent of earth and fear. Laura's flashlight flickered across Finn's battered form, illuminating the pain and exhaustion etched in his eyes. She kept her voice low and soothing, murmuring encouragement. Easy, buddy. I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you. Finn tensed as she approached, the instinct to fight flaring in his eyes, but he was too weak to lash out. Instead, he watched her warily, muscles trembling, breath coming in shallow rasps. Up above, the rest of the team watched in anxious silence. Marcus knelt at the well's rim, ready to pull Laura out at a moment's notice. Riley paced back and forth, her tail flicking, eyes wide with fear and hope. The firefighters kept their gear ready, flashlights trained on the opening. The sense of responsibility heavy on every shoulder. Laura reached Finn, her hands steady as she gently stroked his uninjured flank. You're okay, she whispered. You're not alone anymore. Slowly, with painstaking care, she slipped the padded harness beneath Finn's chest, working it around his battered frame. He flinched once, a soft growl rumbling in his throat, but did not fight. As she tightened the straps, Finn looked up, his gaze meeting Laura's, then flicking to the thin circle of sky above. The sounds of the rescue team, the scent of the forest, the worried mews of his cub, all swirled together in a moment heavy with meaning. It was as if the entire wild world had narrowed to this single, desperate act of compassion. Laura gave the signal. The team above began to pull, the rope tightening, harness straining as Finn's weight shifted. The big bobcat trembled, fear and fatigue wrestling inside him. Laura kept one hand on his shoulder, steadying him, her voice a quiet anchor in the chaos. The first few inches were agony for Finn, his injured paw dragging, his muscles burning with the effort. But slowly, inch by inch, he began to rise. Above, Riley's cries grew louder, urgent and hopeful. The entire rescue team held their breath as Finn, battered and shaking, was lifted toward the faint promise of light. As Finn finally reached the rim, the entire team surged forward, hands outstretched, pulling harness and Bobcat safely over the edge. Riley lunged forward, pressing herself against her father's battered side, nuzzling him with fierce, desperate love. The weight of relief was overwhelming. Tears shone in Laura's eyes as she steadied herself, the sense of shared triumph and responsibility sinking deep. The rescue was not over. Finn needed urgent care. But for one shining moment, the danger was past. Finn was free, Riley was safe, and the whole forest seemed to exhale in gratitude. Above them, the night settled in, cradling the clearing with gentle darkness as the rescue team prepared for the next challenge, saving a wild family's future. Word of the stranded bobcat spread quickly. By the time the last pale light faded from the sky and the stars emerged between the pines, the clearing around the old well had come alive with movement and quiet urgency. Headlights swung in slow arcs as vehicles wound their way through the forest path. First the fire department's battered pickup, then the boxy van of the wildlife rescue team, and finally a handful of locals who had heard the commotion and come to help, flashlights in hand. The rescue scene glowed in the deepening dark. Portable lamps cast islands of golden light, throwing long shadows across the moss and pine needles. Every person seemed driven by the same mix of adrenaline, hope, and anxiety. Strangers joined by a sudden, singular purpose. Riley, still pressed against Finn's battered body, watched the growing crowd with wide, uncertain eyes. Finn, barely conscious, flinched at the commotion, but stayed motionless, exhaustion and pain anchoring him to the earth. Laura knelt close, murmuring softly to keep them calm, while Marcus briefed the newcomers. The fire captain, a stocky woman named Andrea Garcia, took charge quickly. She barked orders with crisp efficiency, dividing tasks among the team. "Rig those floodlights there. We'll need the climbing harnesses and the stretcher. Watch the cub. She's jumpy but not aggressive. Jess, get the med kit ready. We move fast but gentle, got it?" Her words carried the weight of experience. Under her direction, the chaos became orderly. Ropes were checked and rechecked. Harnesses were secured. The heavy-duty animal stretcher was unrolled and padded thick with blankets. Meanwhile, a few local volunteers, Pete and his teenage grandson among them, worked the edge of the clearing, clearing away brambles and tripping hazards. Someone set out thermoses of coffee and a box of donuts, the scents oddly comforting in the tense night. Jess, the wildlife tech, hovered nearby with gloves and syringes at the ready. She'd prepared a mild sedative, just in case Finn panicked or tried to bolt. But as she approached, she noticed the trust in his gaze, the way his eyes tracked every movement, the subtle shift in his breathing when Laura stroked his head or Riley pressed close. "He knows we're trying to help," Jess murmured, more to herself than anyone. Laura nodded. "Let's keep it that way. Let's get him on the stretcher without scaring him if we can." The team sprang into action. Andrea directed Marcus and Pete to gently slide the stretcher next to Finn. Jess knelt at his side, her voice calm and steady, one hand resting lightly on his uninjured shoulder. "Easy, big guy. We've got you." Riley yowled as they began to move her father, pacing circles around the stretcher, her tail lashing. Pete crouched low, murmuring reassurances, using a towel to gently block her path so she wouldn't dart under the rescuer's feet. The old man's gentleness surprised everyone. Even the wild cub seemed to sense his steady heart. It took all their combined strength to lift Finn. He was heavier than he looked, muscles corded beneath battered fur, his body limp but radiating tension. With a grunt, the team hoisted him onto the stretcher. He tensed once as if he might leap away, but then went still. Whether from trust, pain, or exhaustion, no one could say. Jess quickly checked his injuries, working with the steady precision of a seasoned vet. "It's a bad sprain, some gashes on the pads. He's lost blood, but nothing looks broken. We'll need x-rays and fluids, but he's stable for now." She dabbed antiseptic on the wounds, her gloved hands careful and gentle. Meanwhile, the crowd of helpers swelled. Some had never seen a bobcat this close and watched in awe as the professionals worked. Others quietly fetched supplies, held flashlights, or simply stood in silence, moved by the sight of the wounded wild animal and his loyal cub. Conversations were soft, respectful, a reverence for the fragile line between the wild and the human world. The fire crew loaded Finn onto the stretcher, securing him with straps padded in fleece. Laura leaned close, whispering comfort, her presence a lifeline for both bobcats. Riley followed every move, refusing to leave her father's side. Marcus lifted her gently, cradling her in a thick towel, and she hissed, more scared than angry, but then burrowed in, eyes never leaving Finn. The procession from the well to the waiting van was slow and careful. Flashlights bobbed through the trees as the team picked their way over roots and stones. Pete walked ahead, clearing branches, while Andrea and Jess held the stretcher steady. Behind them, Marcus carried Riley, murmuring to her as she shivered in his arms. At the van, they worked quickly to set up a portable kennel for Riley and a larger padded crate for Finn. Jess double-checked the sedative dosage but ultimately decided against it. The big cat was calm, more tired than scared, his gaze always drifting to where Riley waited. The last task was to gently close the doors, sealing them in the safety of the vehicle. The crowd lingered, watching as the rescue team packed up their equipment and prepared to leave. Someone snapped a few photos: Finn's battered form, Riley's anxious face, the ring of rescuers in the golden lamplight. It felt momentous, like witnessing a miracle that could easily have gone unnoticed in the endless sweep of the forest. As the engines rumbled to life and the rescue convoy rolled away, the clearing emptied, falling silent once again. Pine needles drifted down through the light, and the ancient woods seemed to breathe in relief. But in the hearts of those who had gathered, something had shifted, a sense of community and shared purpose, a reminder of the wild lives that depended on human kindness. The rescue of Finn and Riley was more than a single act of compassion. It was a spark, rekindling the old truth that when people come together, even the impossible becomes possible. And so, beneath the starlit pines of northern Minnesota, the night carried a new story, a story of courage, teamwork, and the deep, wild bond between a father and his cub. The night air was crisp and full of breathless anticipation as the rescue team gathered at the well's edge. Every light in the clearing was trained on the stone circle, making the moss and roots glow against the shadows. For the first time in hours, a sense of hope began to break through the worry and fatigue. They had Finn safe, but the job wasn't over. Not until he was truly free from the grip of the well and on the road to recovery. Andrea, the fire captain, did a final check of the harness and rope system, her face set in determined concentration. Jess double-checked Finn's position on the stretcher, making sure his injured paw was gently supported and his head was secure. Laura stayed by his side, her hand steady on his flank, whispering quietly to reassure him. "Almost there, big guy. You're almost out." The team took their places. Andrea and Pete would haul the rope, Jess would guide from below, and Marcus stood by with the sedative and first aid just in case. Riley, pressed against the wall of the kennel, watched every movement through the mesh, her small body quivering with worry and anticipation. Even from a distance, her eyes never left her father. The signal was given. Andrea's voice was low and steady. "Ready? 1, 2, 3, lift!" The rope went taut, groaning under Finn's weight as the stretcher began to rise from the chilly darkness. The first few feet were the hardest. The walls of the well, slick with moss and centuries of water, threatened to catch the stretcher at every turn. Jess called up instructions. "Slower, watch his left side," while guiding Finn's body around a jagged outcropping of stone. Finn tensed as the stretcher swayed, his muscles bunching beneath the blanket, but Laura's calm hand and steady voice kept him from panicking. Above, Andrea and Pete pulled with slow, measured strength, feeling every shift in the rope. Sweat beaded on Andrea's brow despite the cold. The silence in the clearing was absolute, broken only by the faint creak of the rope and the anxious breaths of those watching. Inch by painstaking inch, Finn rose toward the rim. He was alert but exhausted, his golden eyes catching the light as he neared the top. The final foot was the most perilous. The stretcher scraped against the stones, catching for a split second. Everyone froze, hearts hammering, hands white-knuckled on the rope, until Jess, with a final gentle push, freed it from the snag. "Easy, easy," Laura called, and the team responded in perfect unison. The stretcher crested the rim, and suddenly Finn was surrounded by warmth, light, and the scent of pine needles instead of damp stone. A collective sigh of relief swept through the clearing. For a moment, everyone just stood there, staring at the wild bobcat lying on the stretcher, stunned by the success of their efforts. Then action exploded into motion, Jess and Laura checking Finn's vitals, Marcus ready with a blanket, Andrea unclipping the harness with shaking hands. But Finn was no longer fighting. He blinked slowly, the fur on his face dusted with dirt, his body limp with exhaustion, but finally out of the darkness. As if sensing her father's return, Riley let out a high, desperate yowl from the kennel. The sound cut through the bustle, drawing every eye. Laura looked at Jess. "Let's give them a minute. He's safe. She needs to see him." With practiced care, they unlatched the door of Riley's kennel. The cub shot out in a blur, bolting straight for the stretcher. She pressed herself against Finn's battered side, nuzzling into his fur, purring in a deep, desperate rumble that surprised everyone. Finn, too weak to move much, turned his head just enough to touch his nose to hers. For a moment, the world held its breath, a small, wild family reunited against all odds. The crowd watched in awed silence, some blinking back tears, others smiling in disbelief. Even Andrea, who had seen her share of rescues, cleared her throat and turned away for a second. "Let's give them some space," she said, her voice softer than usual. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of the night's efforts became clear. The team worked quietly to ready Finn and Riley for transport. Jess examined Finn's injuries. Fresh blood welled from a reopened gash, and his breathing was shallow but steady. "He needs a clinic, fast," she said. "He's stable, but I don't want to risk shock." Marcus started the engine of the rescue van, the heater humming softly in the chill. Pete and Andrea loaded the stretcher, carefully buckling Finn inside the crate. Riley refused to leave his side, curling up tight beside him as if her very presence might hold him together. Before they closed the door, Laura paused. She knelt beside the crate, her voice a gentle promise in the dark. "You're safe now, both of you. We won't let anything happen to you." The van pulled away, headlights bouncing down the rutted trail toward the animal clinic. The clearing grew quiet, only the distant rumble of the engine and the rustle of the trees remaining. The community lingered in the golden glow of the floodlights, hugging each other, sharing stories, replaying the tense, miraculous rescue again and again. For Finn and Riley, the journey was not over. The road ahead would be long, full of treatments, careful monitoring, and uncertain recovery. But for one shining moment, the impossible had been achieved. The wild had been met with courage and compassion, and 2 lives had been lifted from the darkness into the light. As the van disappeared into the night, every heart in the clearing beat with pride, relief, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes, when people and nature come together, miracles really do happen. The drive to the wildlife clinic was tense and silent, the forest falling away into the darkness as the rescue van bumped along the dirt road. Inside, Jess kept one eye on Finn's battered form and the other on Riley, who refused to leave his side, her little body pressed against his in the crate. Every so often, Finn's chest would shudder with a breath, his eyes flickering open, searching for his daughter. Each time Riley would nuzzle closer, her purring a steady reassurance that he was not alone. The van's headlights finally swept across the small white building nestled on the edge of town, the animal rescue center that served as the region's unofficial sanctuary for injured wildlife. Laura jumped out first, waving to Dr. Emily Parker, the night veterinarian, who had been called in for the emergency. Emily, a tall woman with quick hands and tired but compassionate eyes, wasted no time. "Let's get him inside. Exam table stat," she called. The team hurried Finn and Riley into the clinic, past shelves lined with battered animal carriers and stacks of medical supplies. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the earthy scent of pine, creating an odd sense of comfort. Inside the treatment room, the atmosphere was hushed but intense. Emily and Jess moved with practiced efficiency, working together to assess Finn's injuries. They gently lifted him from the crate onto the padded table. He winced but didn't fight, his energy spent. Blood oozed from his wounded paw, staining the blanket. Emily's brow furrowed as she examined the injury. Torn ligaments, possible fracture. "He's lost a lot of blood. We need fluids and x-rays, stat." Riley, meanwhile, circled the table, mewing anxiously. Marcus, still in his ranger uniform, crouched nearby, keeping an eye on the cub. He offered her a dish of water, but she ignored it, eyes never leaving Finn. Jess gently restrained Finn's head, while Emily cleaned and stitched the wounds, her hands steady even as Finn shuddered beneath her touch. "He's lucky you found him when you did," Emily murmured. "Any longer, and he might not have made it through the night." Laura nodded, her throat tight. The events of the past hours replayed in her mind. The desperate cries, the scramble to rescue, the relief as Finn was pulled to safety. She looked at Riley, marveling at the cub's fierce loyalty. "She's the real hero," Laura whispered. "She wouldn't let anyone give up." Once Finn was stabilized, his paw wrapped, fluids dripping steadily into his vein, a soft towel tucked beneath his head, Emily motioned for the team to step back. "Let's give them some space. He needs rest, and she needs to know he's safe." The little family was left alone in the quiet clinic, the soft hum of machines the only sound. Riley climbed onto the exam table, curling up beside her father. She licked his cheek, then lay her head across his neck, eyes finally closing as exhaustion claimed her. For the first time since the ordeal began, Finn slept deeply, comforted by the warmth and presence of his daughter. Outside the treatment room, the rescue team lingered in the hallway. Andrea leaned against the wall, rubbing her eyes. "That's one tough cat," she said with a tired smile. Pete nodded, arms crossed. "And one brave little cub." Dr. Emily joined them a few minutes later, wiping her hands on her scrub pants. "He's not out of the woods yet. Infection's a risk, and he'll need weeks to recover that paw. But if any animal can pull through, it's him." She paused, her gaze sweeping the group. "What you all did tonight, it made a difference. For him. For her. For all of us, really." The team drifted into the small waiting room, sipping bad coffee and sharing stories in low voices. There was a quiet sense of pride, a knowledge that together, they had done something rare and good. Laura found herself staring at the faded rescue photos on the walls. A fox with a broken leg, an owl tangled in fishing line, a deer reunited with her fawn. Each picture told its own story of compassion, teamwork, and the wild resilience that thrived just beyond the town's edge. As dawn approached, the rescue team prepared to leave, promising to check in on Finn and Riley over the coming days. Laura lingered, her hand resting briefly on the glass that separated her from the little family inside. Riley was awake now, watching her through half-closed eyes, as if memorizing the faces of those who had helped. Before she left, Laura paused beside Dr. Emily. Will they make it? Emily's smile was gentle, full of hard-earned hope. I think so. They have each other. And now they have us, too. The sun rose slowly over the clinic, painting the windows with bands of gold and pink. Inside, Finn and Riley slept together, the world outside growing bright and full of promise. For a few precious hours, there was no pain, no fear, only the warmth of reunion and the quiet strength of recovery. The team's long night of worry had given way to a new morning of hope. Their gentle joy filled the halls, a quiet gratitude that spilled out into the wider world, proof that even the smallest acts of compassion could ripple outward, touching lives in ways they might never fully see. And so, beneath the rising sun of northern Minnesota, Finn and Riley began to heal. Two wild hearts, stitched back together by the kindness of strangers and the unbreakable bond of family. The first days at the rescue center were filled with quiet routines and anxious hope. Finn, still groggy from his ordeal, spent most hours curled on his side, his injured paw bandaged and cradled by towels. Riley seldom strayed more than a few inches away, her small body tucked close, the gentle rise and fall of her breath matching his own. They were a picture of endurance, a wild family battered, but not broken. Laura stopped by the clinic every morning on her way to the ranger station, pausing outside the glass of Finn's enclosure. Sometimes, she'd find Dr. Emily or Jess inside, coaxing Finn to take a few steps, checking the healing progress of his wounds. Sometimes Pete would be there too, a mug of black coffee in hand, watching with the silent patience of a man who knew how to wait for things to heal in their own time. As the days passed, Finn's condition steadily improved. The swelling in his paw subsided, the worst of his wounds knit shut, and his appetite slowly returned. Riley grew more curious, her cub instincts driving her to explore the edges of the enclosure, though she always circled back to Finn. The entire rescue team took turns watching over them, sharing notes on their progress, and quietly rooting for this wild pair to make a full recovery. For Laura, the experience sparked a new depth of reflection. On one particular morning, after a long night patrolling the woods, she lingered at the window, watching Finn and Riley bathed in the gentle light of dawn. She felt a mix of pride and humility, pride for the community that had come together so swiftly, humility in the face of wildness that she could never truly control. She found herself replaying each moment, Riley's desperate cries, the race through the woods, the patient work at the well, and the hush that fell when Finn was finally lifted into the light. Every detail seemed sharper now, heavy with meaning. She realized that true rescue was never about a single moment or a single animal. It was the sum of 100 quiet efforts, courage, teamwork, patience, and empathy that made hope possible. It was Pete's steady hands, Andrea's leadership, Jess's gentle voice, and Riley's fierce determination. Each had played their part, woven together by the invisible thread of care. Watching Finn and Riley, Laura saw that real compassion required humility, recognizing the power humans held, but using it with care. She thought about how often people tried to tame or possess the wild, to make it fit neatly within the boundaries of safety or comfort. But the wild, she now understood, was not meant to be controlled. It was meant to be respected, protected, and sometimes simply trusted to find its own way. The rescue had also drawn out the best in everyone involved. Laura saw how strangers with different backgrounds, skills, and beliefs had united for a single cause. Pete and his grandson, the city firefighters, Dr. Emily and her staff, even the passing hikers who'd first raised the alarm, all had put aside differences, stepping out of their routines to answer the call for help. It was Riley's loyalty, though, that stood out the most. A single young cub, lost and frightened, had somehow found the courage to approach humans and ask for help. Her bravery had brought together a community, forging unlikely alliances and breaking down barriers of fear and mistrust. In saving Finn, they had all been changed, each reminded that sometimes the smallest and most vulnerable could spark the greatest acts of kindness. The lesson was clear. Kindness is not a grand gesture, but a ripple, spreading outward, touching both those who give and those who receive. Helping the wild was not just about saving a life. It was about learning to value all life, to recognize the quiet ways that humans and nature depended on one another. On one of Finn's better days, Laura and Jess watched from outside the enclosure as Finn limped a slow circuit, Riley trotting at his side. Jess leaned on the railing, her voice low. "You know, I think Riley saved us as much as we saved her. Reminds you what's worth fighting for." Laura nodded. "It's easy to forget, isn't it? We get so busy, so wrapped up in our own lives. But then something like this happens, and you remember. We all share this place. We're all connected." The days at the rescue center unfolded in gentle routines. Feeding, cleaning, quiet observation. The team grew closer, sharing stories and hopes, letting the rhythm of wild recovery guide them. Each day, Finn grew stronger. Each day, Riley grew bolder. The wildness in their eyes never faded, but a new trust had formed, fragile, hard-won, and beautiful. As Finn's release date approached, Laura found herself both relieved and a little sad. She knew letting go was part of the job, but the experience had left a mark on her heart. She realized that sometimes the best kind of care was the kind that allowed others, animal or human, to return to their own wild lives, on their own terms. In the end, the story of Finn and Riley became a symbol for the whole community. Photos from the rescue were displayed at the town hall, and children drew pictures of bobcats climbing out of wells. Volunteers signed up at the clinic, inspired by the tale of a cub's courage and a community's compassion. Laura, too, was changed. She found herself looking at the woods differently, not as a territory to patrol, but as a world to protect, a home to countless stories waiting to be heard. And every time she saw a flash of movement in the underbrush, she smiled, hoping it might be Finn and Riley. Wild, free, and forever a reminder of what true kindness can do. Weeks passed, and with each sunrise, Finn and Riley grew stronger. The rhythm of recovery at the rescue center became as familiar as the whisper of the wind in the pines. Finn, under Dr. Emily's careful care, regained his strength, the limp in his paw fading, replaced by a determined, almost regal stride. Riley, always at his side, grew bold and restless, her golden eyes flickering with an energy too wild to be contained by fences or walls. For Laura, the approach of their release was both a triumph and a bittersweet ache. She'd grown attached, not just to the animals themselves, but to what they represented, the fragile thread that connects all living things. The rescue had changed her. The small town, too, had been touched. The Bobcat's story passed from neighbor to neighbor, stirring pride and a new sense of responsibility toward the wild. Early one morning, with the sky still bruised by the last shadows of night, Laura pulled into the gravel lot at the edge of the forest. The air was cool, sweet with the scent of wet earth and budding leaves. The rescue team gathered in quiet excitement, loading the crates with gentle hands and careful words. Jess knelt beside Riley, brushing her soft fur. "Ready, little one?" she whispered. Riley's tail flicked, her ears sharp with anticipation. Finn, calm but alert, peered through the bars as Laura and Dr. Emily rolled his crate toward the open woods. He seemed to know something important was happening. For a moment, all sound faded. The morning bird song, the rustle of branches, even the thudding of Laura's heart. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for this wild family to return. They chose a spot on the edge of the pines, a tangle of brush and mossy stones, not far from the well where it had all begun. The sun crested the horizon, painting gold across the trunks and casting long shadows that danced at their feet. The rescue team stood back, hands clasped, faces solemn with the weight of the moment. Andrea was the first to break the silence. "Ready when you are, Laura." Laura nodded. Her hands trembled a little as she reached for the crate latch. She knelt, eyes level with Finn's, searching for something, understanding, gratitude, a last goodbye. "You're free, Finn. Take care of her. Take care of yourself." She unlatched the door. For a heartbeat, Finn hesitated, nose twitching as the scent of home flooded in. Then, with a graceful leap, he stepped onto the soft forest floor. Riley burst from her crate a second later, bounding ahead, then circling back, her excitement contagious. The two bobcats paused side by side, their fur gilded by the rising sun, wildness shining in their eyes. No one spoke. The silence was reverent, a shared awe for the quiet beauty of a second chance. Finn glanced back once, eyes meeting Laura's. It was a look she would never forget. A silent thank you, full of the mysteries of the wild, impossible to translate but deeply understood. Then, with Riley close at his flank, Finn slipped into the undergrowth. Their bodies blended with the shadows, their movements swift and sure. Within seconds, they vanished, gone but not lost, woven back into the endless green tapestry of their home. Laura stood frozen, heart aching and full at the same time. Around her, the rescue team let out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. Andrea wiped at her eyes. Jess smiled through tears, and even Pete, stoic as ever, nodded once, satisfied. There was no applause, no fanfare, just a quiet, powerful sense of closure. As the sun rose higher, Laura found herself reflecting on what it meant to let go. The rescue had always been about hope, about fighting for another chance. But in the end, true love for the wild was not about holding on. It was about letting go, about trusting that nature, if given the chance, would find its own way. She understood now that success wasn't measured by how close you could keep something, but by your willingness to step back and trust. The act of letting Finn and Riley return to the woods was the hardest and most important part. They belonged here, unbounded, untamed, themselves again. The release was more than a return to the wild for two bobcats. It was a lesson for everyone. The team gathered together, quietly celebrating what they had accomplished, knowing that each small act of care had added up to something extraordinary. They'd witnessed the strength and fragility of life, and they'd played a part in restoring it. As they packed up their gear and walked back toward the edge of town, Laura took one last look at the sunlit pines. She felt a new sense of peace, a knowledge that the wild was not something to be feared or controlled, but to be respected and protected. The journey of Finn and Riley would ripple through the town for years to come, a symbol of what was possible when people came together for a cause greater than themselves. Later, in the quiet of her office, Laura placed a new photo on her bulletin board, a shot of Finn and Riley side by side, just before they vanished into the trees. It would remind her, every day, of the work that mattered most. The wild was still out there, full of peril and promise, and so was she. Forever changed, forever watching, forever ready to help. In the forest, as the day warmed and the world spun on, two bobcats melted into the underbrush, their story only just beginning. Even weeks after Finn and Riley vanished into the shelter of the pines, their story lingered in the little northern town like a gentle echo, touching everyone who'd witnessed it. At the heart of that echo stood Laura Bennett. On a mild spring evening, the community gathered at the old town hall for an event unlike any other, a night of celebration, remembrance, and gratitude. The meeting room was transformed, its walls lined with photos from the rescue. One display showed Finn as he was first found, muddy and broken but alive. Another captured the tense moment as he was lifted out of the well, his eyes bright with fear and hope. Beside these were sketches and thank you notes from local children who'd been inspired to draw pictures of bobcats, whales, and brave rangers. The atmosphere was warm, not formal or boastful, but communal, with the soft hum of conversation and the scent of fresh-baked bread. Laura stood at the front, hands clasped, heart pounding. Public speaking was never her favorite thing, but tonight wasn't about speeches. It was about sharing, about letting the story finish itself in the hearts of her neighbors. She cleared her throat, the room quieting gently. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Some of you were out there that night in the woods with us. Others supported us from home, sending prayers or hot coffee, or just hoping we'd bring those two home safe. But whether you were there in person or in spirit, you were part of this story. And it's your story too. She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Jess, standing with Dr. Emily and Pete. Andrea, arms folded and smiling. The hikers who first saw Riley, wide-eyed with pride. Parents with young children, all gathered by the pull of a single act of kindness. To me, this wasn't just about saving a wild animal. It was proof that a single act of loyalty or a single moment of compassion can unite a whole community. Riley's courage, Finn's strength, and the willingness of so many people to drop what they were doing and help, that's something I'll never forget. Laura gestured to the photo wall, her voice growing softer. And I hope none of you forget it either. If you have a loyal friend, animal, or human, give them a hug tonight. If you see someone struggling, even if you think you can't do much, offer a hand. You never know when a small action might change everything for someone else. She smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing as she caught sight of Pete wiping a tear from his eye and Jess nodding in quiet agreement. This story isn't just about Finn and Riley. It's about all of us. It's about what it means to care, not just for animals, but for each other. For the wild places that make our world beautiful, and for the quiet, everyday acts of kindness that make life worth living. A hush fell as Dr. Emily stepped up to add her own words. Working in rescue, you see a lot of pain, but you also see hope, over and over again. Every time someone brings in an injured creature, every time a neighbor checks on a lost pet, every time a child donates their allowance to help the shelter. Those are the moments that remind us. Kindness is contagious. It spreads. The ripples go farther than we ever expect. As the sun set and the hall glowed with lamplight, stories passed from hand to hand. One woman spoke about the time she found a fawn tangled in wire and called the clinic. A young boy shared how he and his father had built birdhouses after hearing about Riley. Even the mayor, usually reserved, admitted that he'd started leaving out extra seed for songbirds every morning. Each story added a thread to the tapestry of compassion, a reminder that everyone could make a difference. Laura closed the evening with a gentle call to action. If Finn and Riley's journey touched you, I hope you'll carry that with you into your homes, your families, your own wild places. Share your moments of kindness, big or small. Tell your stories. Pass them along to someone who might need a little hope right now. The more we share these ripples of care, the bigger they grow. She glanced at the children in the front row, their eyes shining with excitement and wonder. And don't be afraid to be the one who starts the ripple. Sometimes all it takes is a brave heart and a little bit of faith. As people lingered, sharing hugs and laughter, the images of Finn and Riley remained. A wild father and his cub, given a second chance by a community's love. Their story lived on in the woods, too. Hikers sometimes glimpsed two bobcats slipping through the shadows at dawn, wild and free. Each sighting was whispered about at the local cafe, a little thrill of hope that the story wasn't truly over. For Laura, every time she returned to the forest, she carried a new sense of peace. The wild no longer felt distant or dangerous, but precious, something to be cherished and protected, a reminder of the best parts of herself and her neighbors. She understood, deep in her bones, that kindness was never wasted. It circled back again and again, often in ways she could never predict. So if you find yourself touched by Finn and Riley's story, Laura would invite you to do the same. Like, share, or simply tell someone what happened out there beneath the pines. And if you have a story of your own, some moment when a small act of courage or care made a difference, let it be heard. The wildness and loyalty that saved Finn and Riley live in all of us, and every time we choose kindness, we become part of something bigger, a legacy of hope, rippling far beyond what any of us can see.